I want to welcome you. My name is Brian White, and I'm so happy you're here. Worship team sounded amazing, which is because of them, obviously, and their talent, but also Kelsey's back there, who's our worship producer, and she's doing sound, and that's one of the best sound mixes we've had for a long time. I'm really proud of you, Kelsey. Those drums are just like, dude, that was awesome. Yeah. Then also, which kind of threw me when I came up for the welcome, She and Trevor Hollenbeck were here, I think, yesterday and then also Friday, and they changed like all of the lights out here, so I can actually walk out here and it's in the light, because it used to be, there was a shadow, if you like. I shouldn't have said that. But I do have a couple things, and Colin, can we go back to that Taco Tuesday, or second Sunday tacos video? And this weekend, and this seems trite, but I want to, as a congregation, us to really give our gratitude and thanksgiving. This is Veterans Day, and let's have veterans stand, if you would, if there are any here this weekend is Veterans Day. And for all of you, tacos are on us. If you'd like to come over after worship, we would love to offer you a lunch, and it's in the scheme of things, I know it's a small thing, but it is a token of our gratitude. And just as with those Psalms of Ascent, as they gathered, they were singing those Psalms, and it was also they were going to Jerusalem to the Hebrews. This is where God lived, and I don't know if we can wrap our brain around that, because for them, the model of worship in the Old Testament was the altar. And the model of worship in the New Testament is the table, and we celebrate the God that dwells among us. And more and more, I'm aware when we sit and we share a meal together, God is there, and the Holy Spirit binds us together. And so, Justin said about all church, which we do try to model it after those Old Testament covenant meals and covenants. I was telling staff, part of the covenant in Hebrew is barit. They would cut a covenant, and this has nothing to do with the message, but I'm just so excited about these lights, and but you would cut a covenant, and they would actually cut a calf in half. And then they'd walk through the two parts, and they would say, if I break this covenant, this is what God do this to me. I mean, this is, yeah. And so anyway, we can have carne asada. We've been going through the book of Esther for about a month now, I think. I just love Esther so much. It's, more than any book in the Bible, Esther is all about how God works behind the scenes. And I think this is it's a great balance, because the majority of the Bible, God is just such an overt, active character. In the Old Testament, God walks among us, and in the first, especially Genesis and, Exodus, and God is there with the plagues and, just everything. There's so much in the fiery bush. But in Esther, it's all about God working through behind the scenes. And the words that we have for God in Hebrew, they don't even appear in the book of Esther. I know one translation in particular, I won't say which one it is, but they actually put God in there. It's like, no, you don't do that. I remember when I took Hebrew, we would do translation comparisons, and they'd always make this deal when they'd bring out, there was some versions, and you'd put on these rubber gloves, and it's like, anyway. But anyway, so often is the point, I know I should just shut up now. So excited about these lights! Thank you, Kelsey and Trevor, where you are. But, so often we don't see, how God is present and working at the time. But then we look back after the fact, and we realize how active God really had been all through a situation, bringing together just the right people and all of the right things, just aligning right at the perfect time. And I'll tell you, Esther is a case study in how God does this. God works behind the scenes. So we've talked about this in the last several weeks, but you're never going to get Esther unless you understand. Esther occurred during the Babylonian exile. Babylonian captivity. And this is so critical, and for us to understand what that means. God had it to hear with his people. I mean, his special people, they had just walked away from him time and time and time again. They did what they want, not what God wanted. They would rebel. They would do what they absolutely knew was evil. Because they didn't ever think they'd be held accountable, was the point. They were God's children, and they thought they would just get a pass every single time. They would never be held accountable for their rebellion. And so over and over and over in the Old Testament, God sends prophets. Every one of those prophetic books. This is the point. You can read their stories in the Old Testament. And there's a bunch of them, but the people, they don't listen. So God sends these prophets to say, if you don't turn back, something bad is going to happen. And eventually, God just withdraws the safety net. He lets them be conquered, and Jerusalem's taken, and they can't believe it. The temple is destroyed. God's chosen people were taken from their homes. Families were broken apart intentionally, and then they were dispersed to all points throughout the Babylonian Empire. They were called the diaspora. It's a Greek term. It means, a farmer would scatter seeds. That's how the people were, God's children. They were scattered to the winds. They lost their homes. But they lost each other. I mean, everything that they had. Because they didn't think they would be held accountable for their sin. And God used the Babylonians as punishment. I mean, that's what this is. And I think we need to be honest when we think about this. How often is this us? We get away with things that we know are not right. And then we start thinking it's okay. Although clearly it's not. And we don't think there's ever going to be consequences for our actions because either we've never been caught or we're like spoiled kids that just don't feel like they should ever be held accountable. The thing is, spoiled kids grow up, but their behavior does not. So Esther is a beautiful story about an orphan girl, Jewish girl, living in the diaspora this time, and she grows up, it's a Cinderella story, she grows up to be the queen of Persia. But that's not all, because Esther is God's answer to a tremendous emergency. God's children are about to be destroyed, and we've talked about this the last several weeks. We've led up to this, but God saves his people through Esther. This balances Moses so much and Deuteronomy so much. We've been working our way through this story. For a month, Esther's cousin is named Mordecai the Jew. And it's really, really critical to get Mordecai. It's not just Mordecai, it's Mordecai the Jew. Now, we're several generations, probably about 4 generations into Babylonian captivity is the point. Mordecai still identifies himself as a Jew. And it's singular. It's like, he's the only Jew left. Pretty much every single time he's mentioned in the book of Esther, he's mentioned as Mordecai the Jew. And there's so much more here going on than we realize, because if you think about the whole reason for the Babylonian captivity was to break down their sense of nationality. There was a strategy. When a nation was defeated, they were forced into exile. They were taken from their homelands. Like I said, families were broken up. They were dispersed and sent to all corners of the empire. But that's not all. They were given Babylonian names. And we talked about the names a little bit earlier. And, in Esther, there's several things. It's too bad there aren't named like, Hank and Julie or whatever. But, and some of the translations will go to the Greek names. Some will go with the Babylonian names. But they were given new names. And they were forced to be a part of new families. They were forced to intermarry. They were forced to learn a new language. They were forced to eat foods that the new empire, the new people ate. And there again, this is huge. Remember, the Jews had a very, very strict diet. And there was a strategy on the Jewish part here. And we don't always understand that, I think. The reason they had a specific diet was to keep the Jews together. to make sure they didn't intermarry with people outside of their religion. I mean, if you can't eat dinner with somebody, you're not going to marry them. And your faith isn't going to get watered down. Syncretism is the term. It's when another religion, their beliefs start seeping into yours, and it taints it. That was never going to happen because they couldn't even eat with them. The reason for the dispersion was to make the Israelites Babylonians. They knew within a generation or so, the diaspora Jews, they would be assimilated and they would identify themselves as Babylonians. They just had to wait it out. 4 generations into the diaspora, Esther's cousin is still known as Mordecai the Jew. He's the holdout. He remembers who and whose he is. And he's the one that God called to raise Esther. Esther becomes queen of Persia. Same time, this man, Haman the Agagite, becomes second in command, second only to King Xerxes. And there again, we talked about this, but it's so important there again to understand this story. Haman's an Agagite. Mordecai is a Jew. Agagites and Jews, absolute mortal enemies. One of Mordecai's ancestors was King Saul. Saul was defeated by an Agagite king. I mean, this goes way back. And that hate's just been brewing and brewing and brewing for hundreds of years. Mordecai the Jew refused to bow to Haman the Agagite. The only one in the whole land that wouldn't bow to him. And so Haman, we saw, he rammed through this decree that called for complete annihilation of the Jews. Just going to destroy them all, complete genocide. So the king, he signed it. He didn't really know what he was doing. He didn't really care. He didn't pay attention. Mordecai pushed Esther, we saw, to overcome her fear, overcome her anxiety, devise and carry out a plan to destroy Haman. And it never would have happened, we saw, without Mordecai's influence. God was nudging him. God was pushing him to reach out to his daughter-in-law, or whatever, not daughter-in-law, stepdaughter. The point is God worked through Mordecai. Esther was God's agent. God had placed her in this position for such a time as this, it says. But she unveiled Haman and his plan to the king because Mordecai pushed her. Never would have happened without his pushing, his nudging. God was working through Mordecai. So the king hangs Haman on the very gallows that Haman built to kill, to destroy Mordecai in front of everyone. And then the king gives Esther Haman's entire estate, and then Esther places Mordecai in charge of the estate. And then it goes even further because King Haman, he takes the ring, the signet ring that he had given Haman, and he puts it on Mordecai, the Jew's finger, saying he's second in command of the entire nation. That's where we left off last week. But the story's not over. The ruling to destroy all of the Jews in the land, it still stands. And we don't quite get this, but listen to Esther 8. Chapter 8, verse 3 through 6. Esther again pleaded with the king, falling at his feet and weeping. She begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman the Agagite, which he had devised against the Jews. And the king extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she arose and stood before him. If it pleases the king, she said, and if it regards me with favor and thinks it is the right thing to do, if he is pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, devised and wrote to destroy the Jews in all of the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see destruction of my family? Do you hear what she said to the king? Don't let this happen, king, to my people. As your queen, I'm not just some nameless, faceless person you don't know, king. It's me in this edict. This is meant to destroy my people, king, my family. The ruling still stood. She put her own neck in the noose with these words. I'm a Jew, king, your wife, that's me. Take my life if this edict stands. I'm going to remind your whole court this right here, right now. If they die, I die with them. Your wife. Esther's the only one in the entire land, the entire kingdom, who could get away with this. She knelt for this condemned people. She pled for the salvation of the people that she loved, because she identified herself as a Jew. Mordecai was not the only Jew any longer. There was another Jew in Persia, Esther, Queen Esther, the Jew. You know, there are times when we have to stand up against what is clearly wrong, and we have to identify ourselves with others because no one else would listen, and that takes courage, right? Esther is all about courage. She faced her fear. She traded it for resolve. And whatever happened, she knew she was doing right. The king couldn't revoke what had been done, but he declared a new directive. I want to share it with you. The king's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, annihilate the armed men of any nationality or province who might attack them and their women and their children, and to plunder the property of their enemies. The day appointed for the Jews to do this in all of the provinces were the 13th day of the 12th month. And a copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as a law. Every province made known to the people of every nationality so that Jews would be ready on the day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The king had signed Haman's edict of genocide. Couldn't revoke the king's orders. Even the king himself couldn't revoke what he had signed. Haman pushed it through. King didn't realize it, but he did sign it. And so on the 13th day, 12th month, every Jew was sentenced to be destroyed. He couldn't revoke it, but he issued this counter. And it said, if any Jew is attacked on the 13th day of the 12th month, I not only give them the right to defend themselves, I charge them completely to annihilate, kill, destroy anyone who lifts a finger against them. Further, they can take the property, the estate of anyone who seeks to do them harm. This went over incredibly well with the Jewish population. They went from a potential Holocaust, right, to just adding converts that day. All of a sudden, everybody remembered, hey, I'm Jewish too. You know, Mordecai no longer the only one who identifies himself as a Jew. Everybody wants to be a Jew. Listen to Esther 15 through 17. When Mordecai left the king's presence, he was wearing royal garments, blue and white, a large crown of gold, purple robe, fine linen, and the city of Susa held a joyous celebration. For the Jews, it was a time of happiness and joy and gladness and honor. In every province, in every city to which the edict of the king came, there was joy and gladness among the Jews with feasting and celebration, and many people of other nationalities became Jew because fear of the Jews had seized them. There are several lessons for us today. We have a consultant, and many of you know him. We've worked with Reggie McNeil for many, many, many years at this point, and I've learned a lot from Reggie over the years. But one, he wrote in one of his books, his early books, and it just really rocked my world. He wrote about the difference between planning and preparing. And he pointed out there is absolutely nothing of any consequence at all in the Bible that occurs as a consequence of people planning it out. Nothing at all. If you think about the Bible, people's plans doesn't matter. But when a people prepare for what God has planned, everything changes. What I want or what God wants? What do you think is going to be bigger? What do you think is going to change our world as we know it? Something that I can plan, something that I can envision, or something that God has envisioned? The more you think about it, I mean, it's actually an issue of idolatry. Are we chasing after our own dreams, or are we being called to be a part of God's vision? The more you think about planning versus preparing, it's a faith issue. It's a spiritual discipline issue. I mean, who is really the God of my life? My job, our job, is to prepare to get ready for what God is calling us into, what God wants to do, what God has planned. There is no way anyone would have figured out and saw ahead of time what God was doing in and through Esther's life. But when you look back at it, it's so clear. You can't plan for what God has in store for you. Esther teaches us you can't see what God has planned for you. It's larger than anything you would ever know. But think about the moment that Jesus died on the cross. I mean, end of story. I mean, no wonder all of his followers, they just dispersed, right, in the Passion. They're just gone. Who could have planned on the resurrection 3 days later? But after God works in your life, you look back, and it's so clear what God was doing. Why couldn't I have seen it all along? Because you can't plan for what God has in store. But you can prepare. You can be ready for what God has in store. You can be ready for God's call at any moment. The hard thing is we want to be in control. We tell ourselves, we fool ourselves and tell ourselves that we're in control. But we're not. We're not God. Even though most of our lives, I think, our actions say we kind of think we are. God is trying to work somehow in your life right now. In some way that you can't see. And you can't foresee where this is going. He has plans that you would never, ever, ever see coming. And Esther reminds us that at those moments, we can't even feel God sometimes. But God is profoundly present. God is working in ways that we can't see, that we can't anticipate. And so often God works through other people. You know, Esther never would have done this without Mordecai's nudging. We saw this last week. Can you imagine being a Jew in the Babylonian exile and hearing the Persian king had just signed a decree to destroy you? There is no way out of that. The king couldn't even reverse the order. But Esther teaches us, even when there's no hope whatsoever, when you can't see any way out of your situation whatsoever, when you are locked in a dark tomb, and you can see no light whatsoever, no hope, no way out, God is at work. God has a plan. God is bringing people alongside you. God is working behind the scenes in ways that you cannot comprehend. And if you just hang in, and if you just hold on, you're going to discover in ways you would never, ever see coming. It's so much clearer to see how God was at work when we look back from our vantage point. And we see, after a difficult journey, what God was doing all along. You didn't notice at the time. I think about our Honduran ministry. I've been thinking about Honduras a lot lately. We have a big ministry. I've been working down there for years in the mountains of Honduras. We choose intentionally to work with mountain villages, families. And really one of the primary qualifications is just we want to work with people no one else will work with. Tons of people go down to the larger cities, Tegucigalpa, Tepeque, and thank goodness for them. So thankful. But not many people will go up in the mountains. It's a harder deal. But so often, we see the experience from our side, and we don't think about the experience from their side. And as I was working on Esther this last week, I was thinking about this and wondering about their experience. And so this is Ojo de Agua, which is the city, or the village, the city, that we've been working with. This is Danya. This was the first time I went to Honduras, or to Ojo de Agua. I've been there I don't know how many times this. But is the microphone not on? Can we go back one, please? Yeah, thank you. So this is Danya, and that was her home when I first went to Honduras. And Danya had a son. The next picture. Some of us know him as Henry. I know him as Saul. And Saul had leukemia. And through 2020, particularly, she would take him down the mountain. They're way up on top of a mountain on a burro, a donkey. And then she would make her way, once they got down to the main road, to Tegucigalpa. And there was a variety of ways they did that. They'd hitch a ride if they could get in the back of a truck or something. They'd take a taxi, but every day, but it was several times a week through 2020. And it was a miserable experience. We think we had a bad go. The next picture, this is Saul. I think that's his cousin and a little girl. And the sign says, "Without water, there's no life." And it's right in front, right below was their water source, is the point when we first went. And I think that's the next picture here. Yeah, and this was the water source for the whole village, but also for animals. You could see there was always hoof prints and pig prints and everything in their water source. And this happens every village we go to. It was very, very difficult with this village, the way the gravity feed to get water up to that point. And we actually reforested thousands of trees, helping the watershed to be replenished. But then also we put in a system, and I think the next picture is we were able to create a holding tank, and that pipe goes back to the water source after we captured the water. I think that's the next one. Nope. Go back, please, one. And then we used solar to pump it up, which was new for us and pretty darn ingenious. I didn't come up with that. To take it up even further up the mountain, and that's the next picture, is their tank. And then it dispersed down, and this is most of the villagers, the teacher over there, Cindy. And so Steve went down a couple weeks ago, and he put together a couple videos, but one was Danya singing a song. And before we get there, and I think a lot of us who've been here for at least a couple years know her son Saul died, and I was there right after he died, and it was really sad. But she put together a song, and I want to just play an excerpt of that for you, a little video in the next segment.
Desde Ojo de Agua, un saludo para todos ustedes. A los hermanos de la iglesia Hillspring, con mucho cariño, su hermana Dania en Cristo, con su siguiente composición. La canción Un sueño hecho realidad. Ahora, hermano, les voy a demostrar mi talento que Dios me lo ha dado. Es mi canto, canción especial, dedicado a todos ustedes y va escrita con toda mi alma. Yo les canto feliz y contenta.
So thank you for pausing right there. As we look at it on the right, that's Cindy. She's a teacher of the village. On the left is Erlinda, who has been our cook I've been going down for 18 years now. And I've been at her home, I don't know how many times, but the amount of time she has cooked for our groups, she's just part of our church. And we'll get to something else with Erlinda in a minute, but she's a huge part of our church. But just the chorus alone in this song that Danya wrote, we're very grateful for the community between Ojo de Agua and Hillspring, that our friend has given us a helping hand. God has blessed them with abundance to share with us. And she goes on, and it's actually fairly long. But I'm just so struck. You know, one of the things we talk about is we are blessed to be a blessing to others. This goes back to the 12th chapter of Genesis, when God pronounced upon Abraham this blessing that God would bless them by working through them to bless others. And I just can't think of a better example than that, except for the rest of Steve's video. And I want to show that to you, but watch for Erlinda, because we actually hired her she's not only an amazing cook, has the best fried chicken I think I've ever had, but she also is quite a seamstress. And so one of the things we put together is a sewing center in Ojo de Agua, which is solar powered, but she is the instructor now for the group. So let's watch this video.
Hello, I'm Steve Lewis, and I want to give you an update on our ministry in Honduras. For the last 15 plus years, Hillspring has been going to Honduras to work with mountain villages to put in water projects, pilas and latrines, and finally build some houses. Well, a few weeks ago I had a chance to be down in Honduras for a week to do 3 different things. First, I wanted to check on Ojo de Agua. That's the village we worked with for the last 7 years. We have invested in a chicken project there that has just taken off and done wonderful. We spent about $4,000 to set this up, and it's the best $4,000 that Hillspring has ever invested. They are already producing about 900 eggs a week. They have a hard time keeping up with the demand, and they have made so much money, they have started a bank, a community bank, for those who might need a little extra funds to work on their home, or if they have a tire and a motorcycle they need, they can get a loan from the village. So that's how the village made about $150 a year. Well, with this project now, they're making almost 3,000 American dollars every year. The sewing program is going wonderful. There's a whole group of men and women, young and old, who are taking the sewing class and learning basic sewing skills. They hope to start making uniforms for the school and maybe even soccer jerseys. So again, thank you, Hillspring, for all the wonderful work you've done. The other part of my trip was going to La Cienega. It's a village we haven't been to for about 12 years or so. It used to be the model village before Ojo de Agua. So when we talked about how well the economic developments went, I began to say, hey, is there villages we have worked with that we could go back and reinvest? So we went to La Cienega, and my trip began to talk with them about an animal project. We discovered that they already had a pig pen that was built by Hillspring about 12 years ago. They had pigs in it for a couple of years, and then they let it go, and termites have sort of taken over. And the problem at that point in time was just not having the education necessary probably to have livestock. So we're going to work with that basic structure and put a new top on it and get it prepared for chickens or pigs. The village has been debating which one of the livestock they would like to pursue, so we're going to do one of the other of those. And then finally, went to a new village called Sarin. Sarin is a new village that we're going to be exploring starting in June with the youth trip. This is going to be a wonderful project, a new relationship that will be invested in the next 7 years. The water project here is going to be interesting because the water is toward the middle of the bottom of the mountain and the village is at the top. So it's going to be the biggest water project we have ever undertaken. But we're excited about the new village, and we hope you'll support the Honduran ministry, both with your presence coming, with your financial support and prayer support, as we continue the mission to be like Jesus Christ by connecting with the people God places in our lives, developing meaningful relationships so that we might change the world for the better. Thank you.
If you're interested in the adult trip, the dates were up there in January. We have next week after worship, there will be a planning meeting next week to talk about that trip. That trip's going to go to La Cienega, and I would say The Ohodiawans are, this is our probably biggest hit the ball out of the park village that we have. But Los Cienegans would be right up there as well. They'd be close second. We worked with them quite a while ago. Amazing people, amazing village, and really super exciting. And one of our goals is always to take subsistence farmers and help them become agricultural entrepreneurs. And I agree with Steve. They needed a little bit more long-term help in that pig project that we had initially with them. I have a lot of stories about that pig project that I think Tammy made me throw out some luggage just because it never was going to smell right. Ever. That was bad. But yeah, so please, next week after worship. But also I want to thank everyone. It's not just down south. And this last week, we have a mobile market once a month that we provide food, work hard for people in Eastgate Elementary. We do a quarterly offering, and we raise money for that. And this last week, normally we, as I understand, we expect 250 families. They brought food for 350 families, and about 60 had to be sent away. There's a lot of need right now, and a couple of things I said last week as well. You don't have to wait for one of those Fifth Sunday offerings to put money into helping with the mobile markets. This really is it's a big need. It's not cheap on the church's end. And also we have our discretionary fund. We are getting a lot of calls right now. People are very concerned with being deferred and the shutdown and everything. And so just want to throw that out. That's a 12-month out of the year thing, but we're having quite a bit more need than we've had in the past, and till things change, it's going to continue. So I want to lift that up for our congregation. You're such a giving group. It's just such an honor for me to be a part of a community that sees need and sees hurt out in the world, but just doesn't just see it, that we are willing to meet that need. If it's here domestically, if it's internationally, you have always been such a phenomenal giving community. I just love you all so much. Would you pray with me? Lord, I thank you for your call, for the ways that you provide, calling us to join you. Lord, give us the wisdom to set our own plans aside and focus more and more on preparing for what you have in store for us. We are so incredibly grateful for the blessings that you have given us, and help us to remember we are stewards. And our job is to partner with your work to bring healing and hope to this broken world. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.